Hey, welcome back to another video. It's Shadow time again. And this time, instead of having a more focused, specific thing like going over lore or talking about unused songs for his bizarre self-titled game, today I just kind of want to talk about random trivia. I've been a gigantic Sonic nerd for basically my entire life, and since I've been actively on the internet for the last 15 years, I've picked up a lot of random weird trivia that I just want to kind of get out there. Plus, people seem to like a lot of these X minutes of random something trivia kind of videos, and I want to throw my hat in the ring because they seem like a lot of fun to do. So whether it's about Shadow himself, his game, or things tangentially related to him, we're going to be rapid firing off some random tidbits that I have rolling around in my, at this point, blue-tinted brain. These are going to range on a scale from no friggin' duh obvious stuff to some of the more obscure things. So whether you're a big Sonic fan like me, or you're pretty unfamiliar with the series, hopefully you'll at least come away from this video having learned something new. There's not really going to be much of a flow and structure to this video, it's mostly going to be just me adding stuff as I learn about it or remember it, so sit back and let's talk about, let's say, about 10 minutes of Shadow the Hedgehog trivia. Starting off with something really obvious that's only gotten even more obvious recently. Early on in Sonic Adventure 2's development, Shadow sported a much different design and was called Terios instead of Shadow. That design leaned a lot more into the evil Sonic angle, and it's a lot to take in. A lot of the other designs that are on the same page are also a lot to take in, but this one is easily the most noteworthy of all of them. It's the one that fans latched onto, it's the one that tends to be used to represent Terios. It is basically the design. I do kind of dig how odd this look is, but ultimately I'm glad they went with what we got, because I don't think Shadow would have been anywhere near as popular or iconic if they had gone with this. And of course, this design did get resurrected as an alternate skin for Shadow in Sonic X Shadow Generations, which was a truly insane reveal. I lost my absolute marbles when they revealed that. Now when it comes to Shadow's final design, Sega actually kept that a secret for a while, but back in the day, it got leaked by toy company Resource, apparently. At the time, they had the license for Sonic figures and had done a, at this point, very rare and collectible line of Sonic Adventure figures, and announced their intention to do the same thing with Sonic Adventure 2, announcing figures of Shadow and Rouge before either of those characters had been revealed publicly. Now you might end up thinking, at least we got some Shadow and Rouge figures out of it, right? No, because Resource ended up going out of business not long after that, so those figures were never produced. Big reveal got spoiled, and all for literally nothing. But man, what I would give to see what those figures would have looked like, because Resource's figures are a very interesting kind of style, and Shadow and Rouge in that look would have been a hell of a thing to see. Did you know that Todd McFarlane's Spawn somewhat inspired Shadow's creation? Yes, really. During the development of Sonic Adventure 2, a lot of the dev team was living and working in America, and during that time, they got introduced to a lot of the darker, more ambiguous anti-hero kind of characters that were really prevalent in comics at the time, specifically Spawn, and that ended up helping with Shadow's creation. A lot of the basic idea had already been established, but it was these kinds of characters that pivoted Shadow from straight-up bad guy to more ambiguous and kind of a hero by the end of the game. There are a total of 14 uses of the word damn in Shadow the Hedgehog. 7 of them are from the game's cutscenes, with the rest of them all happening during gameplay. Sonic can say 1 of them, 3 of them are from Knuckles, 1 Shadow says when you get hit, and there's 2 more that Shadow says when you die. So in theory, you could actually ratchet up the number of damns you hear in a playthrough as high as you want, depending on how many times you die. For some reason, there was a period in the Archie comics when Shadow's chest fur was colored orangish yellow instead of white. You might reasonably think this would have happened during his initial appearance, which still would have been confusing, but somewhat understandable. But no, this was after Shadow had already been introduced with the correct colors. Just for some reason, his chest fur was wrong for a while. It's been implied on a few occasions that Shadow is something of a gearhead. In the pre-reboot Archie Comics continuity, Shadow's bike, the Dark Rider, is a modified gun-issued motorcycle that he customized himself simply because he likes it a lot, even though he doesn't actually need to use it. And in Sonic Free Riders, the description for his extreme gear, the Blackshot, says that he customized it himself from the model that he used in Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. Despite that, in the visual novel The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, which is canon, Fight Me, Shadow says himself that he's not that great with computers. Sonic Heroes ends up being fairly important for Shadow as a character, but he wasn't always planned to be there. Shiro Maekawa, who is the scenario writer for Sonic Heroes and several other Sonic games, posted a list of the initial teams, or at least what was being considered, and Team Dark just doesn't exist. Rouge is on a team with Amy and Cream, and Shadow and Omega just aren't in the game at all. Shadow's render in Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games is missing his tail. You might think it's just because of the angle he's standing at, but Shadow's at basically this angle in a lot of his art, and you can always see his tail. It just isn't here for some reason. Shadow actually has 2 English voice actors in Sonic Adventure 2. For the vast majority of the game, Shadow is voiced by David Humphrey, who would continue to voice the character up until they switched over to the 4Kids cast, but for a handful of lines, mostly during the final boss, his voice is instead provided by Ryan Drummond, who also voiced Sonic at the time.
I'm Shadow the Hedgehog, the one and only ultimate life form.
He's still very powerful. What kind of monster is this? How are you doing, Sonic?
He's starting to irritate me.
The red swelling may be a weak spot. Sonic, aim for it.
Sonic, you're out of rings. You will lose your super form.
Sonic, what are you doing? You're almost out of rings. Switch places with me.
And if you're wondering what the reason for this is, according to a Q&A Ryan Drummond did a while back, it's basically because of Sega cheaping out. Essentially what happened is that they had brought David Humphrey in to record his lines for Shadow. Then when he left that day, they realized there were a few lines they didn't have him do. So instead of calling him back in to re-record those 2 lines and needing to pay him for an entire other day of work, which is just how that system works, they opted to have Ryan Drummond do it instead because he was already in the booth. And while we're on the subject of Shadow's voice actors, his current English voice, Kirk Thornton, is a very prominent name in anime and video games, which is pretty much the case with all of the current English Sonic cast. He's done voice work for Bleach as the narrator and was the voice director, or at least one of them, Sword Art Online, where he was Klein, and in Digimon, he voices a bunch of Digimon. And he's even in Kingdom Hearts, where he voices Saïx. Amusingly, as of Kingdom Hearts 3, the voice he uses for Saïx is basically identical to his Shadow voice. It's deeply surreal.
I destroyed you once. I will do it again. So it's not desperation I see in you. It's foolishness and lunacy.
Shadow's Japanese voice, Koji Yusa, is also a very prominent voice actor. You can hear him as Genichimaru in Bleach, Atticus Rhodes in the Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and for my fellow Toku fans, he's the voice of Urotaros in Kamen Rider Den-O. And we might as well round out Shadow's major voice actors and go over Jason Griffith a bit. He was the 4Kids voice of both Sonic and Shadow, and if you're around my age, he's probably the first voice you think of for both of them, even if he's personally not my favorite for either character. Given that he was a 4Kids voice actor, he was in a lot of stuff they handled the voice work for, like the 2003 TMNT series, where he was Usagi Yojimbo, and in Pokemon, he voiced Ceylon in the Black and White seasons. And very funny to me, he was in the dub of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX as Atticus Rhodes, so both the Shadow the Hedgehogs were Atticus Rhodes. What does the movie Return of the Living Dead Rave to the Grave have in common with Shadow the Hedgehog? They both feature the Power Man 5000 song Almost Dead. So in case you thought that song's inclusion wasn't weird enough already, it also ties the franchise tangentially to the 5th movie in the Return of the Living Dead franchise. The trailer for the Sonic 3 movie features this sequence that is very reminiscent of a part from the opening for Shadow the Hedgehog. This is almost certainly intentional given that director Jeff Fowler worked for Blur Studios, the company that handled the pre-rendered cutscenes for Shadow the Hedgehog. Things really have come full circle for him. At basically any given moment in Sonic X, Shadow is usually missing a quill. Normally when you see Shadow head-on, or indeed in almost any angle that isn't completely from the side, you should be able to see 5 quills. 2 on either side of his head and then the 1 on the top, basically kind of looking like Doom's eye. But in basically any shot in Sonic X, you can only see 4. And you'd think you'd be able to see all of them when you see Shadow from the back, but nope, only 4, and it's really weird. So if you've ever thought Shadow looked a little odd in that show, there's why. He's missing quills. There is stock art and even several shots from the show where he's got all of his quills, but most of the time he just has the 4. Back in October of 2005, to promote Shadow the Hedgehog, OneUp.com did a preview of the game which featured a sort of interview, quote-unquote, with Shadow. And one, this thing is written really weird in general. It's not at all like Shadow should ever talk. But there's a lot of really interesting information in it about things that Shadow is supposed to be a fan of, like the Terminator movies. He apparently likes Madden football and Burnout. and he eats pizza, Doritos, and Snickers, and he's a fan of Hot Pockets. Obviously, this is not canon in any way, but it's very, very funny, and I just had to point it out. Have you ever noticed that after Shadow the Hedgehog, most 3D renders of Shadow feature damaging and scuffs on his shoes? If you didn't before, you will now. It's not in every game, but it is in most of them. I'm pretty sure that none of the 2D stock art of Shadow bothers to include it, however. And I think that should be about enough random, inane trivia for today. There's still plenty more to go over, plenty more for Shadow, plenty more for Sonic in general. I think I've talked about a good number of things here. Hopefully you learned something new, whether it be major or minor, probably minor given the very nature of a lot of it, but still, learning new things is neat, even if you're never going to use any of it. So if you enjoyed, consider giving the video a like, because it helps me out a lot. Subscribe if you want to keep up with the future stuff that I release. Usual links are in the description: Blue Sky, Twitter, music list for what was playing in the background this whole time, all the fun stuff down there. But that'll be it from me. I hope you have a great day, great evening, whatever, and I will see you guys next time.